Good morning, Joseph. I hope you're doing well. I hope everyone's doing well this morning. Pardon me for being a few minutes late again. It's not quite the same when I don't have my stream to the outside view situation going on. I use that as a buffer, but that's okay. You guys don't seem to mind waiting a minute or two here and there. It's usually always technical, right? I'm usually in my seat at the right time, but I guarantee there's something that goes wrong every single day. It just it doesn't matter. There's always something. But you're not here to hear complaining about technical difficulties. You're here for a little acknowledgement, a little verification that old sun came up here on the east coast of North America, and a little bit of verification that Bitcoin is still running. Indeed, we have a sunrise confirmation and Bitcoin confirmed running for the morning. So all that's left for us to do is have a coffee and talk about what is new. Of centralized control and greed, a new solution Bitcoin decreed. I'm loving the AI poems in the morning, by the way. They're really doing great. I forget how good they even get. The one this morning was better than yesterday, I would say. We're getting some good poetry out of the old chat GPT. We're fans. Bud says, good morning, Cal Casa. Welcome, Cal. I hope you're doing well, man. Glad you could make it. Dave says, good morning. The sun is definitely up in New York, Kevin says. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. We love the old New York Count BTC greater than the royal coronation. Yeah, I was watching it a little bit. I had it streaming. Poor fellas had some rain. Everyone looked pretty good. Happy that happened. I honestly didn't even think that Charles was going to go through with much of a public situation, simply because nobody likes him. But he did it anyway. So, I mean, it's a neat thing. We're going to be talking about some leadership and stuff like that today. Hawaii. Oh, Bitcoin graffiti in the nice place. I see. We love Hawaii. I've never been. My wife keeps telling me we got to go. It's one of the few places I just haven't made it to. It's kind of a far flight, and if I'm going that way, I'm just going to keep going to Japan. That's kind of what I think. But that's just me. So we're not talking about travel this morning, though. We've got some amazing clown world stuff to get to. So I don't know if you guys saw this. Finished Jurassic Park was amazing. I'm glad you liked it, Bitcoin Graffiti. He's a pretty amazing writer, Michael Crichton. The Lost World, go for The Lost World. Go right to the second. The movie was not the same as the book. Spielberg had to make the movie before the book was even done, and he only got sort of notes and then went off on his own a little bit. But he's not one, Michael Crichton, to make a sequel just because he's going to get paid. He was getting paid more at that time than he'd ever been paid because ER was so profitable for him that he did it because he really wanted to write the book. Another one, State of Fear, I absolutely recommend State of Fear, Bitcoin Graffiti, absolutely. State of Fear is really his novel about global warming and the corruption of science. That's what it's about. So he did his own research. Again, you'll see the format, right? You're actually reading kind of a textbook on a subject, except it's wrapped up in a narrative. And State of Fear really is sort of the manifestation of his own research into global warming. And, he applied the scientific method. And that's what he came up with. So it's great. One that many people don't talk about, but that taught me a lot, was this one called Airframe, which is about the air industry. I liked it because it had a lot to do with Seoul and espionage between America and South Korea. And this was sort of around the time where my head was really in Korea. I had just been living there. So, it just resonated with me. But what I learned about the air industry through it was remarkable. I'll never forget some of that. The wings, the corporate espionage that goes on, the engineering that goes on. But more importantly, it's a small little piece in the novel, but when you realize how many parts an airplane has, how many moving parts, it's just extraordinary. You can't help. Every time I enter an airplane now, I just marvel at the engineering of these things after that book. So that would be one I would recommend. State of Fear, definitely up there. I mean, almost everything. I haven't read everything he wrote, but I've never read anything he wrote that's bad. So there you go. And if anyone else doesn't want to read an entire, oh yeah, Rising Sun, yeah, Rising Sun. Sorry, I forgot to mention that he is a Japanese Japan expert. So he's a not only is he an expert in so many things, he wrote that book Rising Sun about a murder investigation, and it was really about the meeting of American culture and Japanese culture. And if you remember, they made a movie about that with Sean Connery and Wesley Snipes in the 1990s. So another you forget how much stuff he actually touched. Right? We're just one of the most eclectic people. And I'll reiterate about Michael Crichton. He was a advisor to basically every president that lived in his professional life. I mean, everybody just sought him out because he could go on for hours and hours and hours about any subject in the news at that time. Just one of the most remarkable people, 7 feet tall, almost 6'10" or something crazy like that, just a giant. And if folks out there don't have enough time to read his books, the one article I would recommend for a sense of his writing is from Playboy, and it's still readily available on the internet because it's such a classic, and it's called Aliens Cause Global Warming. And it's about the fraud of Carl Sagan, and not so much Carl Sagan himself, but what he did to corrupt science and make it more like a press release and more like a studio happening than actually adhering to the scientific method. So I don't think he had anything against Carl Sagan himself. He had a lot of questions about that ridiculous Drake equation. You guys ever heard about the Drake equation, which proves there's aliens? Right? But what it does is it just makes a bunch of fake math and puts letters and unknown variables all over the place. And oh my God, there's like mathematical functions as a part of an equation. Oh, it must be real. Oh my God, he proved aliens exist. Really, it's just a collection of unknown constants that he just assigned value to and just strung it all together and dressed it up as science. And people still to this day will quote the Drake equation like it's a thing. Like, oh, the Drake equation. Don't you know there's really aliens? And he just destroyed it. So, if you want my thoughts on aliens, it's simple. If you believe in simulation theory, it's almost impossible for there to be other life in the universe, just because getting those two stories to harmonize would be nearly impossible. Now, that doesn't mean there's never been anything like an alien in history. So one of the other realities about the simulation theory is that history is actually getting written backwards. Like, we find history as we need it, going back in time. So the minute we start asking questions, for example, about the pyramids, right, then different features will start appearing, and we'll be able to have an explanation for it. So there might have been something way in the past, but getting two timelines to sync up just from a point of view of throughput and computer capacity looks kind of complicated. So that's the reason why a lot of simulation theory people believe you'll never find an alien. And I think Elon Musk is sort of even quoted along those lines, but don't take my word for it. You'll probably find him saying there might have been aliens or whatever, because he'll say all kinds of crazy stuff. But I think if you press him on the question of simulation theory, it removes even the possibility of an alien civilization. So there you go. Having those things line up over time would require basically just too much CPU. So that maybe not, though. There's a lot we don't know, obviously. So that's just one theory, but we haven't found much yet. But let's get right to some Moscow time, right? So what's going on in Moscow time? Well, it turns out that George Soros is going to be buying the failed liberal media network Vice. So that's something that we're going to be tracking. But this is the best part. So Kamala Harris has been named the AI czar to save us from artificial intelligence. So there you go. Yeah, the Drake equation is like Keynesian economics, fake math to trick people into thinking it's scientific. Great. I'm glad I'm not the only one who's seen the Drake equation for what it is. If you read this story, Aliens Cause Global Warming, you'll find out that it's basically the aliens caused the Drake equation in the whole Michael Crichton argument. It's basically this. If you read the article, is fun just to read because it's so witty. and so clever, and it has the goods, it has the details in it, if ever you need to argue this stuff. But what it really underlines is aliens cause global warming. So what he's talking about is the Drake equation. The minute you suspend your verification of science and you start trusting scientists, then you end up in a situation where you're going to believe in the aliens. And then he just said, you just take that cognitive closure and apply it to global warming. The same process of check out the science, we got aliens. And then it's check out the science, we're going to burn in a superheated planet. So it's the same argument, and that's the point he's getting at. He gets into a lot of secondhand smoke stuff too, and you wouldn't believe how fake secondhand smoke is. And as someone, look, I worked in the bars before they got rid of the cigarettes, and I'll say I'm happy to have smoke-free environments. I hated the way my clothes smelled, hated the whole experience. But I grew up with smoking parents who would smoke in the car if they felt like it, right? Even if it was cold, they would sort of just open the windows a bit. And I was honestly one of the great runners of my whole province. I was a champion long distance runner and short, anything I felt, I ran all kinds of different distances. So no history of asthma or anything like that, even though I grew up in a house that still has smoke running through it all the time. My parents have barely quit that stuff. So, I mean, who knows? It's anecdotal. I'm absolutely not applying science to it. I believe that the being around secondhand smoke is definitely bad, and I try to avoid it. I had a problem even when the secondhand smoke bans came in about stopping private businesses from being able to offer the chance to smoke. Like I would love if there were places that were still allowed so that smokers could go there. The ubiquitous ban on smoking it didn't make much sense to me. I thought you'd have enough of a market just by saying no smoking and people would go. But you have a lot of scofflaws still, and people still sort of do it. So I'm happy. That's one of those rules that I'm definitely in favor of. Didn't want to be around secondhand smoke after growing up around it enough. I don't like the smell. I don't like anything to do with it. I like cigars as far as tobacco goes, but I'm not a fan of cigarettes. Cigarettes are the problem, right? Tobacco, not necessarily. Another good book, if you guys are looking for some interesting literature on the history of smoking, cultural history, or drinking, or sugar. There's a fellow named Ian Gately, and he was a diplobrat. I think he grew up in Hong Kong as a child of diplomats, and wrote the cultural history of nicotine. It's called Smoke, but I've also seen the book called La Divina Nicotina, and just remarkable history around smoking. It asks the simple question of why do people smoke in every culture, and it's fascinating. It starts in Hong Kong with basically models staying slim. That's the reason for today that some people might want to smoke cigarettes. So it just gets into what tobacco is, what it's meant in history, and you'll have a different appreciation for tobacco by the end of it, because even in the story he'll have like a bunch of love letters to tobacco, for example, like dispatches from World War I in the trenches, and you'll have a bunch of soldiers say like, "I love you, family, but really just I don't care about anything right now. Send me smokes. I just want tobacco. I would have not made it this far." And you actually also hear from some of the great minds of all time, I think Newton and a bunch of these other people. I don't remember the names of who they are actually quoting, but the amount of love letters to tobacco and its capacity to enlighten and spark cognitive increases in humans and imagination and all those kinds of things. So definitely not telling you to smoke tobacco. Don't take my advice on smoking health, but that the story isn't so simple as tobacco 100% bad. Cigarettes 100% bad. It looks like cigarettes 100% bad, but tobacco is much larger than cigarettes. Nicotine, much more important drug, chemical substance than cigarettes would have let us know. So there you go. Pretty interesting stuff. So that's another interesting look. So let's get back to this fake news. It's not really that fake. It's just that people said it with a don't necessarily smoke, stick with weed. Yeah, that's definitely another way to approach it. And because as I understand with tobacco, it's actually the temperature at which it burns in a cigarette that is the most dangerous, according to this book. According to this book, the temperature at which it burns and the injection system of inhaling, because you don't inhale cigars and you don't inhale chew and you don't inhale some of the other things, so they didn't have as many bad effects. But look, no doubt cigarettes are bad for your health. So but secondhand smoking, what you get in this article written by Michael Crichton is a sense that a lot of things were exaggerated. A lot of belief was suspended for political purposes. And he was pointing that out in like 1991 or something like that. That's why I keep saying Bitcoin, it almost would have been unfair if Steve Jobs and Michael Crichton and some of these people were still around. We would already be on a Bitcoin standard. You'd have been dealing with some of the most persuasive people. So in the simulation world, I see why they were taken off the board for our purposes here. We wouldn't. What we're going to talk about today, the importance of people coming across information and the importance of information working its way through their minds, and the exercise of people actually coming to these conclusions independently and themselves is really one of the most important things, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So that's a bit of what's in the news. So this whole idea of Kamala Harris. So here's the Associated Press headline: Vice President Kamala Harris is meeting with the CEOs of 4 companies developing artificial intelligence. The Biden administration is rolling out initiatives meant to ensure AI improves people's lives without putting their rights and safety at risk. Now, the funny part is that Kamala Harris is being treated as someone who's capable of doing this. Now, the idea that the White House is going out and thinking about AI and talking about it already way too late. I mean, it's already flown. That horse is already out of the barn, obviously. I don't think there's anything the White House could possibly do at this point to usher it back in, and probably should have had this meeting 2 years ago if it was ever going to mean anything. But they got Kamala on it, and that's the funny part, right? So Kamala, who I'm here talking about tobacco and all these things. I'm no doctor, right? I'm definitely no doctor. That should be clear by now. But I can diagnose her from afar with some kind of either alcohol or drug addiction. Just the kind of things she says in public, the laugh, the lack of confidence in the things she's saying. Now, I don't know, but when I look at her, I see someone who is a substance abuser. That's what I see. Every time she speaks, I see a substance abuser at this point, right? No, either she's a substance abuser and that's the problem, or she's really, really stupid. And that's the problem. I don't think she's really, really stupid. I think she's a substance abuser. But we have other problems if she's just dumb, right? That's a whole separate bunch of problems. I don't think that's true. I don't think she's a complete moron and idiot. I think she does struggle with some form of substance abuse. And, it's even the position that she's in, right? You remember the minute she dropped out of the primaries in 2020, I said she's going to be the vice president. I was sure of it, because they were removing her from the equation and sort of saving her. I had no idea what a bad candidate she was. I thought she was going to win the nomination in a romp in 2020. I didn't think it was even going to be trouble for her. But then once you start hearing her speak and you're like, oh, they got some problems. Now, it looks like the drug or substance abuse or whatever is going on has gotten worse since she became president. And it reminds me of something that Bob Dylan said. People have criticized Bob Dylan, for example, that you can't look at him if you're on tour with him. He doesn't want people looking him in the eyes and those sorts of things. And people, oh, what a jerk, what a prima donna, right? It's not really that. He's actually spoken about what fame meant to him and what all these fans and what everyone looking at him for answers has meant. And he says it's a strange form of guilt. A guilt that you just can't get rid of, because he just thinks of himself, obviously, as a human who's got a million faults and has the same voice in his head that's full of doubt and says, oh, you can't do this. And he's just a human being, right? And he said that the guilt associated with people thinking of him as a savior or as something that he doesn't perceive himself as is a hard thing to deal with. And when you think of someone like Kamala, who really didn't have to go through many hoops to get what she got, right? Let's be honest. She was cast in the role of vice president. And so there she is. She's the vice president, and she's got to go every single day and tell people about all these things going on, and she doesn't look like a great public speaker. I mean, she just doesn't. And public speaking is one of the largest anxiety-inducing things a person can do. Now you'd say, oh, right, she was a senator for years, and that. Senator is different. That's bringing up her legal prosecutorial abilities. And that's why I didn't know she was such a bad campaigner. I'd seen her prosecuting people before on the Senate floor. She's very good at that. But all you're doing there is taking questions, pushing people in a corner, pushing them around a bit. That was what she was trained to do. That's her job, not exactly public speaking. I understand there are cameras in the room and people are watching, but it's watching a form of choreographed speaking that has rules and a system you can follow. It isn't like getting up and just talking about AI, or the best one she's had where it proves she's drunk is just this idea of buses and stuff, like electric buses. You ever heard her talk about electric buses? Wow. she's completely amazed by electric buses, as if like they're a magic carpet that has flown from a genie bottle and is helping kids ride a magic carpet to school every single day. I mean, she's off her rocker what she's talking about. And the only thing I can ever think of when I hear her talk, what was the one the other day about time and reality? I mean, she's drunk. That's what it sounds like, right? Now, I let me say I have absolutely no inside information. I don't want to spread rumors. She could be that dumb. She could be. I don't think she is. She could be. I just don't believe it. I can't believe it. That's a worse problem to be in, is if she's that stupid. If she's just a drunk, that's fine, right? She drinks too much, doesn't quite have her thoughts in order. And so it's easier for me to believe that that's what's going on. Yeah, yesterday is today and tomorrow is yesterday. This is one of her. Johnny Rico comes up. Yesterday is today and tomorrow is yesterday. So there you go. It's a real thing. And this could be it. Look, benzos, Johnny's saying benzos, opiates, and speed most likely, and booze. Don't know. I hear booze when I hear the slurring. I worked in bars and restaurants for I started at 13 in a bar and a restaurant. So, and didn't really drink. I was never a big drinker. In my 20s when I lived in Asia, and I lived in Europe for school too. I drank in that environment, of course. What else are you going to do in Europe and Asia besides drink? But never someone whose personality really changed. I can take it or leave it. Quitting alcohol was the easiest thing for me. I have zero cravings, and now I'm revolted by it, completely revolted. I hope to get, tipsy again one day in my life, but it's fun, right? We like that. But not something that I embrace by any stretch of the imagination. But as someone who worked in that environment for many years, you can kind of see what happens when someone arrives at the bar, sits down, and then within a couple hours they're slurring. You just see it enough. So I could be wrong, but that's what I see when I look at her. So and apparently she's the AI czar now. It's hard to beat this stuff, right? It's really just super clown world. But what I was getting at by bringing up this thing, it reminds me, and this is something, so you get that situation with Kamala Harris and her own, and it might even come in handy. I'll explain why in a second, right? With her alcoholism and her troubles, or whatever it is, whatever addiction she has. I wonder if it isn't an opportunity, though. And here's what I'm going to say. So Ben Shapiro commenting on something the Surgeon General has just said. So the Surgeon General yesterday says that we now have an epidemic of loneliness and isolation. What have I been saying here for a long time? I've been saying that loneliness is one of our major problems, right? The mating systems have been completely turned upside down in the last 10 years because of Tinder and all these other things. I talk to all walks of life, people from all walks of life. I have many rich, handsome male friends. They're having a ball, right? Swipe right party. But I know other people, right, that aren't in that category, and it's tough for them, right? There's not a lot going on. Not so simple. Time out. You got to hear the deposition of Donald Trump when this woman who's accused him of rape, and he has just the best excuse ever, by the way. This is just reminds me of my friends telling me these stories, and how it was great for some people who are good looking and have money and are on the apps, and it's just a cornucopia, versus the others who get nothing, and what that's meaning. We're going to continue with that, but I just got to mention, when you hear Trump talk, sometimes it's as funny as it ever was. So he's giving this deposition, and he keeps saying, well, it's not politically correct to say, but let's just say she's not my type. She's not my type, right? Because the woman is not that pretty. And they start asking him about the old Billy Bush Sunday video, right? You know, the grabber by the thing, and they're pushing him. You know, do you think, is that true? And he goes, well, historically, it's been it's been true historically. You know, for millions and millions of years, you know, the men who have these things get what they need. And they keep trying to push him. You know, do you think you're a star? And he goes, well, yeah. Oh, yeah. Like, do you think you're Imagine asking Donald Trump if he thinks he's a star. Could you imagine having to ask Donald Trump if he's a star? If he thinks he's a star. I mean, he might be the most famous person in the world, or in the top 10 at least. But just imagine asking him if he thinks of himself as a star. It's ludicrous. And watching him answer that question, you got to see it. The deposition, he's sort of getting sick of these people, and his patience is getting a little tested, but he's still got the humor there, so it's pretty funny. So let's get back to the epidemic of loneliness and isolation. So the Surgeon General comes out and says that it's an epidemic of loneliness and isolation. We see it with all kinds of testimonies out there, especially with COVID, right? COVID that forced everyone to shrink their social circles. We've now predicted then that there would be this huge wave of loneliness that came about because of it, and social isolation. Now you're starting to get some people who are talking about it publicly, mentioning these problems. And Ben Shapiro picks up on what the Surgeon General says. So this is the Surgeon General from the Biden administration talking about epidemic of loneliness. So he says, Ben Shapiro, the Surgeon General, after promoting social isolation for 2+ years, has released a report on the epidemic of loneliness and isolation. Yep. Side note, every problem noted could be solved by robust religious community. Yet every solution recommended is government intervention. One second. Sorry, I got kids a crying. Sometimes I can't think when I hear it, you know? But we love our kids, and they're free to cry on a Saturday morning, right? No problems there. So what Ben Shapiro is saying is that this loneliness epidemic is out there. Religious groups, which I 100% agree with, right? There is no better solution than community systems. You know, really all you need is someone to listen to you. All you need is someone who can spend some time with you and hear about your problems. And sometimes just saying your problems out loud is enough. Religious communities are excellent at this. But of course, there's so much brainwashing around religious communities and how stupid people are for going down that hokey old road. So there's a lot of inborn prejudice, especially amongst, one second. So the religious communities can help in this instance, right? No one is denying that. Unfortunately, there is a lot of indoctrination out there, like anti-religious communities, as if they're bad, and these things, especially people who say, "Oh, I'm too rational to involve myself with a religious community." All of these people, right? So, and that's fair enough, right? That's fair enough. So one thing I've been talking about here is AI and its capacity to increase our cognition, and also the relationship that we can enter into with AI. In that, it's my prediction that AI, especially personally trained AI, will be 100% devoted to a person's happiness, personal growth, spiritual growth, all of those things. So you could you could end up having a situation where you train your AI, and AI, one can imagine, is going to be 100% devoted to a person in order to help them with the problems. What I mean by that is 100% empathetic, right? Even more empathetic than a a pastor, even more empathetic than a religious leader whose job it is to listen to you, but they still have other jobs, right? They still have many people to listen to and all that stuff. So there's a Balaji video going around today, of Balaji during his Lex Friedman interview. I think it was last autumn. And he's talking about the increase in cognition that AI can bring us in order for us to exit the matrix, if you will. And what he's saying is more or less this, right? He's talking again about the rat trap, right? So rat maze, and you can train rats, for example, right? You can train a rat to take every odd number door or even number pathway, right? So skip one, enter one, skip one, enter one, skip one, enter one. You can train them to that system to navigate a maze, apparently. I've never trained rats in mazes, but according to Balaji, very possible, has been done many times. But there's a limit to what patterns they can perceive. So, for example, he says, if you made every door a prime number, they would have no idea how to do that, right? They'd have to start calculating 2, 3, 5, right? They just can't handle prime number frequencies and patterns, and would never be able to navigate that. And what he says is that humans probably have a similar limitation, where you don't know that the answer to getting out of a maze is as simple as it might be. It might just be turn into the prime number doors and you'll get there. But although we are excellent at pattern recognition, there are some obvious patterns right in front of us that we just can't perceive. And he says that it might just be a little bit of cognitive increase that will allow us to perceive these patterns easily and navigate into these things. Even this whole thing about AI, and I've been hearing a lot of people talk about this. I was planning my session yesterday with Tur Demister and a fellow named Dhruv Bansal, who's from Unchained. So we're going to be talking about AI at the show in Miami. And one of the things I was mentioning, and I've learned this from Scott Adams, who's also talking about AI a lot, and he came up with a great analogy about personal AI and what happened recently that no one is really talking about. And it looks like this. So when you saw the original AI come out for facial recognition, right? The Dhruv the Hashirazen guy, I think so, yeah. So when you think of facial recognition AI, which the Chinese have already kind of perfected a little while ago, right? So when you first saw that, you said, oh, do they need to scan every face in the world, get a database of all those faces, and then scan a face to check it against the entire database? The answer is no, right? Because if it was that, if they had to go and perceive through the entire system of every single face, the database would be simply too large. It wouldn't be as transportable. It wouldn't be as useful, because you would have this one huge system that would be very difficult to replicate and would require so much computing power. But in the end, all they figured out that they needed to do was basically turn every face into a fingerprint. So it's like the distance between your eyes vis-a-vis the distance to your chin vis-a-vis your earlobe to your mouth. And there's a couple key points that you can actually reduce every single face to. You can reduce every single face to like 50 kilobytes, just a small string of relational numbers, which is like a fingerprint. So then you don't need a database that has every single face scanned and stored. You don't need anything like that, right? You just need to look at each individual face, find the fingerprint, and then check it against a list of fingerprints that are there. And AI looks like it's the same thing, in the sense that when we see Brian Rommel and these other folks that have already sprung AI, large language models, trained them on small devices, that's the trick that they use. That's why you don't need this huge amount of memory and RAM in order to run AI like we thought maybe before you did, because you'd have to put every single piece of a training model into it in order to get something out. It turns out, it looks like, now I'm not an AI engineer, right? I'm just looking at it from my bird's eye view and I'm trying to intellectualize what I see. And what I saw with the facial recognition AI looks very similar to this magic trick of being able to reduce it to just a few key points. And it's those key points, the pattern recognition of language, being able to recognize patterns, like, in the English language, if you're playing Wheel of Fortune, right, the famous American game, and you get a Q, you're gonna have a U, right? So it's kind of like that. There are enough rules that the AI can go on that it doesn't need much. Once it has the basic rules down, that's how it can be trained on different devices and actually live on different devices and be able to find ways to express itself in that way, right? So, this capacity to train individual machines means that the patterns, which I think are important, the patterns of language, things we haven't even recognized ourselves. You hear this a lot about now AI can guess languages and know the entire vocabulary of a language with just a few words as a starting point. You know who else could do that? It was J.R.R. Tolkien. Tolkien, the writer of The Lord of the Rings, was a linguist, right? He studied semiotics, Levi Strauss, and all those kinds of things. That's what he did as a professor, not just as a writer. And he indeed was able to learn new languages within like a half an hour because he knew so many languages and knew their root words and knew what was going on with the entire linguistic structure, that he also understood patterns to such an extent that he was able to guess words in a language and what they would sound like and how they would function. So, I mean, I don't know the extent of his superpowers, but this is something that AI is doing easily now. But a human being was at one time able to do this with his expertise. That's how he invented so many languages, right? He invented Elvish and Entish and Hobbit, or maybe Hobbit spoke a common tongue, but the dwarf language, all this stuff, he invented it right from scratch, and it's all there. Like the complete language is there. You can speak these languages, you can write these languages, and he was able to create them and was able to at the same time learn and express himself in languages he'd basically never heard of before, because he was so well versed in the patterns that form language. And in some ways, he is sort of the original large language model that I know of, because of this superpower. Now, we're seeing this superpower and this cognition become available to humans. And what Balaji is basically saying here is that if you can train them on these patterns, if they can see the patterns that are simple, the simple patterns, they're going to be able to get out of the maze, right? So if humans, what he's saying is if humans can start seeing just a few patterns, and I think one of those patterns is around money, right? It goes back to the old Andreas Antonopoulos speech about the definition of money, and everyone uses that, the three, it's a medium of exchange, it's a unit of account, it's a store of value. How many times have you been bored listening to this shit over time as a Bitcoiner? Nonstop this shit, right? But he always brought up the one that they never talk about, the system of control. And the patterns are obvious, right? That this is a system of control. And now that, and this is what we've been talking about for a while now, Balaji did his bit signal, got a lot of conversation going. It's sort of spurred a whole bunch of people thinking about it and what's going on, right? He's been pointing out that that you've got a history now of the Fed Reserve knowingly lying to the public, and that should be a sign that people are being shepherded into a certain direction to prove to serve a political purpose. And so he's been ringing this bell, and that's why folks like RFK and Vivek are so important. Why we've been talking about this basically all week, that now that the challenger candidates for the presidency of the United States are smashing talking points every single day about CBDCs, about Bitcoin, and about control of the Fed, you're starting to educate people more on the subject. But look how sinister things can get. We get this from Miles Sutter, who works for Cash App, who will also be a Bitcoin 2023 speaker. And he was retweeting something from years ago about the fella who is on our, what is he on, the $20 bill in America? Andrew Jackson, right? So Andrew Jackson was president of the United States in the early 1800s, so 1820s thereabout, or 1830s. And he destroyed the second central bank of the United States. And here's something that he said, right? So this is a quote. So Miles Sutter bringing up how important this fellow was to destroying the second bank, and that he has been denigrated in our history books as a result. So here's what he says. So Peter, first of all, Miles interviewed Peter Thiel. So Peter Thiel says, "Tell me something that's true, but nobody agrees with." So he doesn't have a great reputation, Andrew Jackson, although he is on a piece of money. So he says, Andrew Jackson was the greatest U.S. president, and his killing of the second bank of the U.S., the second iteration of the central bank, is intentionally buried by history books, is what he says. Intentionally buried by history books. And he goes on to say the history of the United States is the history of its monetary policy. There's a reason old Hickory is singularly slandered by the mainstream. He was fiat woke. Your education is the product of a government monopoly, and the takeaways you are left with a matter of bureaucratic policy. There is so much out there to discover if you seek to break your conditioning. So put that in the context of what Balaji is talking about, an increase in cognition, an increase in capacity to understand these things. And indeed, this is what Franklin Roosevelt, speaking about Andrew Jackson before history had changed his perception of what he meant to America. This is what he said, right? Andrew Jackson stands out in the century and a half of our independent history, not merely because he was two-fisted, not merely because he fought for the people's rights, but because through his career, he did as much as any man in our history to increase on the part of the voters knowledge of public problems and an interest in their solution. So what Franklin Roosevelt is saying here is that Andrew Jackson's main contribution was that he spurred an interest in problems with American people. Now, what's going on in America today that is similar to this is exactly that. You read the news. It's what I was saying yesterday. It's, oh, Trump said something. There's a trans person who's annoying. Some people love that trans person, but other people think they're really stupid and annoying. There's a guy who got killed, and it was unfair because the color of the murderer was not the right color. So it's really bad news. And we all have to talk about it because it's the worst thing, and it means so many bad things about our country. But even if the murderer was another color, we wouldn't be talking about it at all because that happens all the time and no one ever mentions it because nobody cares. So it's the same news story every day, right? Nonstop. And that these new candidates have come out, like RFK and Vivek, and are presenting people with the actual problems in America, money, for example, and spying, for example, and psyops, for example, and talking about these things constantly is changing the perception that Americans have on what actually ails them. We're starting to get more alignment on the problems in America, and the solutions are becoming more and more a matter of discussion. So what Balaji says about increasing our capacity and our cognition a little bit because AI has come along at the right time, to me has meant for a long time that we're going to have this personal tool that will care about us so much, that will want us to thrive and succeed, and can shield us from fake news and help put us on a more golden path individually in order to reach some form of self-actualization and growth, right? So having a conversation about these problems becomes really, really important, and it's actually happening, right? So here's another way of putting it. So Balaji tweeted yesterday regarding what's going on psychologically as a result of the money. Remember, that's what this morning is all about. It's all about our psychological relationship with money and as a result, the state. And Balaji says it's not just a multipolar world, it's a bipolar system. And he means that psychologically, right? Bipolar. It has two modes, apathy and panic. Nothing to see here. It's transitory. Then moon rates, print trillions, or both. Never any calm preparation. They just deny it until it's undeniable. So what he's talking about is the economic situation right now being managed in a very schizophrenic, bipolar way, which is literally what this morning is all about, right? We're talking about the bipolarity, the schizophrenia, the broken brain that is the federal body and the sovereign nation of the United States at this point. And when you hear folks like RFK and Vivek talking, they're getting away from that bipolarity. They're exiting from the schizophrenia and the forced pantomime fighting that's going on. So now that you've got someone like RFK running, he's just getting the traction that he needs, right? So he was on the All In podcast yesterday with David Sachs. Imagine, right? This is one of the biggest podcasts in the world. This influences so many left-leaning folks. It's something that Trump never had the benefit of. He had Jason Calacanis and all of these other people telling everyone on the West Coast that anyone who disagreed with them was a stupid idiot because they were also racist and da da da. But now, with this podcast being probably the most important podcast in venture circles and tech circles, now treating these issues openly and everything that RFK was talking about openly, it's a big change. So here's what he said, right? So this is David Sachs talking to RFK on the media and big pharma. So Robert F. Kennedy says on the show, there are consequences for these newscasters who depart from the orthodoxy. They know who they're working for. So right away, you get an idea from on this podcast that you can't trust anything coming out of mainstream media because of the business model, right? Simply because of the business model. So you wouldn't have heard that a long time ago, right? And then you get David Sachs coming in because, of course, now RFK taking a lot of fire from neocons and Democrats. You get David Frum, who I've met, who is as rock bottom stupid as you're going to find. I worked with his sister, who is lovely. His sister is lovely. She was a senator in Canada. And I've met David Frum a few times. One of the smarmiest people you're ever going to come across. Just even when you see the plastic surgery and the conceit in his entire aspect. No, I got no problem with someone who wants plastic surgery. Honestly, like, go for it. But when you see someone who wouldn't even lift a weight and lose a bit of weight and is still opting to chop their face up for some projection of health, which is fake and phony, you get a sense of what you're dealing with, right? So this is one of the most manufactured looking people ever. And what's it for? It's to go on the fake news broadcasts and not look ugly, I guess, even though he's not. I'd put him in the same boat as the lady Trump was talking about, right? Not really a looker, right? Like, Trump's excuse, by the way, is 100% believable if you have a look at this woman, right? If you have a look at her, you're saying, I don't know if he's cheating on his wife for that lady. But I don't want to be a jerk, right? We're not here to make fun of people's looks. But it's when you hear Trump say it, it's true. And so David Frum attacking RFK now. Why is he getting embraced by all the MAGA people, right? That's they call him a conspiracy theorist, and then why do the MAGA people like him? That's the same trick every time. So David Sachs says, I don't think a man named Robert F. Kennedy, and so David Frum even asks why he should run as a Democrat. Why he should run as a Democrat. I don't think a man named Robert F. Kennedy Jr. needs to explain why he's a Democrat, David Sachs says. The real question is why the Democrat Party embraced Bush-Cheney neocons like David Frum. So again, you're right over the target when you're talking about uniparty, when you're talking about the new collusion between old enemies in the political circles, and indeed talking about how all of a sudden Democrats have become so pro-war. When did that happen? How did it happen? Right? Those are some of the most important questions in America right now. And let me get this out of here. So they continue to talk about this subject in the All In podcast about the tactics being used by mainstream media to limit the effectiveness of RFK. And here's what they say. They say this is an example of how dissenting views are labeled as misinformation, as really a suppression tactic. This is a tactic now of the elite to declare certain inconvenient truths or viewpoints out of bounds. I don't think they can dismiss you. And that's Chamath speaking to RFK. The whole podcast was really interesting, right? He starts mentioning and actually has his blueprint now on how to get rid of the deep state. So here's what he says. Here's how I will dismantle the surveillance state. I will replace the officials that have been instructing tech companies to censor users. I will direct the Justice Department to stop prosecuting whistleblowers and start investigating the crimes they expose. I will rescind administrative policies that surveil Americans' communications. In the long term, it is about forging an entirely different relationship between people and government based on respect. You couldn't say it better, right? He even talks again about something from the 1960s when he was just a little boy, about the naivete Americans had about their government lying to them. And here's what he says. He says, in 1960, the USSR accused the US of running an aerial spying program over its territory. Our government denied it to the American people, only admitting it when confronted with the captured U-2 pilot Gary Powers. Americans were genuinely shocked that their government would lie to them. Today, the lying has become so routine that people are no longer shocked. There can be no true democracy when government manipulates the people with spin, hype, propaganda, phony leaks, and outright lies. I will establish honesty and transparency once again to earn back the trust of the American people. Now, imagine a leader speaking like that, a Democrat leader. It's wild, right? This is a better way of saying what Trump used to always say, drain the swamp, right? This is it. He's saying drain the swamp. He's saying it explicitly, drain the swamp. And in the same way that Andrew Jackson was able to get people to talk about the problem and therefore talk about solutions, we now have someone who's actually trying to break free of this selected headline monopolization that mainstream media had in order to crowd out discussion of the real problems and focus everything on trends and not maybe the banking crisis. And so he's taken direct aim here at the Uniparty, and it's pretty powerful stuff. Now you get this, there's a fake news guy who's been following Vivek Ramaswamy around. Now, you guys probably heard the good news that we've booked Vivek Ramaswamy to speak at Bitcoin 2023 in a week. So we're going to have both RFK and Vivek there. Now, some people have been saying, when are they going to team up? When's that going to happen? I don't think it'll happen at our event. I think they both have to go through their primaries first. RFK is going to get cheated entirely. There's no debate happening, by the way. He's never going to share a debate stage with Joe Biden. It's not possible. It's not happening. That's my prediction. So this guy, Jonathan Weissman, right, a total fake news scammer, came out and tried to write, and he's been following Vivek, and he followed him in the New Hampshire and tries to think of him as a lightweight and all that kind of stuff. And he writes this down as a tweet in order to suggest that Vivek is an idiot, right? And I'll tell you what it is. He says, on Wednesday night in Windham, New Hampshire, Mr. Ramaswamy suggested he would name Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the Democrat vaccine skeptic challenging President Biden, as his running mate. And he meant it to be like, look at these idiots, right? Look how stupid they are. So what do we get out of that is conversation that is happening. And that's something we've been predicting for a while here. There is a world where RFK gets so cheated by the Democrats that they create a third party. And it is a mix. It is a bipartisan effort in order to break down the old political divisions, which is really what the problem is in America, right? It's the spin, it's everything that RFK mentioned earlier. So if you can have that scenario, if you get these two people now in a conversation around a bipartisan ticket, that could light the country on fire as far as enthusiasm and excitement for this goes. So because you're not going to get it from the mainstream. Here's the mainstream. Remember that correspondence dinner? They gave an award to a Washington Post journalist, and they were like hugging and smiling, and it was all about, he got the award because he was the best White House correspondent reporter, because he had managed to really capture the President Biden's Catholic faith, right? The Catholic faith that absolutely denies his illegitimate grandchild. That is a matter of truth with the court case and Hunter Biden fighting for to not pay any paternity and alimony, not alimony, but paternity and cost to his own kid that he had with the stripper. Because swell guy, the president, right? And so this Matt Visser now had another tweet about this, and he goes, President Biden to MSNBC on his son Hunter, who is under Justice Department investigation. This is all he has to say about it, right? This is the top White House correspondent. This is the top. He won an award last week, right? Saying, my son has done nothing wrong. I trust him. I have faith in him. It impacts my presidency by making me feel proud of him. This is an actual quote from a guy who won an award for writing about how Catholic and great the president was, while ignoring the grandchild baby. It's a baby. This kid's like 3 years old or something, and ignoring it, right? Just can't get better than that. You really just can't. It's perfect. So here's what we got, right? We got a media that is going to continue to try and feed people bullshit about, oh, what a Catholic, and it makes me feel better about my presidency. Oh, I need to be, you got to leave my son alone. It's fine. Whatever he did is fine, right? It's annoying. Versus these other guys who are talking about rooting out the deep state, having a new relationship between government and people that doesn't go through these third-party interlocutors, the media, that is able to have a bilateral relationship that is even going to force people to have more cognition and awareness in order to participate. And hopefully the tools like AI are there for them to participate and understand more and navigate money systems of control a lot better. But it looks like with Vivek and with RFK that we're getting a solution more or less like the one Andrew Jackson helped spur, which is this idea that we can have knowledge of the public problems, we can talk about the public problems directly, and at the same time talk about their solutions without getting distracted by spin and deep state biases, or the thing that their goals being achieved, more or less, is what I'm trying to get at. So there you go. Big things happening, right? Big things happening. It's the green glasses from The Wizard of Oz. It's a fiat veil. Emerald City Syndrome, indeed. Yeah, that is... that's it. I killed the bank. Good morning, Bitcoiners. Yesterday was more glitchy here with YouTube, especially. Was my feed glitchy? Let me know if my feed is coming in glitchy, guys. I don't see it. If it is, I didn't listen to the show yesterday. Tell me if I'm having any glitches in audio stuff, because I can fix those. I'm not hardwired because my internet is so fast for Wi-Fi, but I can hardwire it easily. So please let me know if I'm getting any glitches again. I hate those glitches. No glitches here? Okay, good. Good. Jackson also savagely... Yeah. No, I know that. Yeah. So I think the point, ordinary Bitcoin is, and I know the Trail of Tears simply because I'm from, right over here on the shores of the island of Montreal, you have the start of the Iroquois nations. We have the Mohawk Indians that were never, there's no Trail of Tears on the Canadian side. They're still, we don't have Western movies for a reason. They never got pushed west. They're still in the East. So if I drive down from here, I can go to Akwesasne, which is another part of the Six Nations, both in New York and Ontario and Quebec. So Gananoque, we've got Kennesaw, we've got basically many Iroquois people all down the Great Lakes. You still have some in the Finger Lakes region when you cross over to the United States, Oneida and a few others, but they're just sort of still close to the main center of this culture, which is still in Canada. So I know the Trail of Tears because it's the opposite of what happened around me. We still have sort of all of that. It's pretty much the way it was. So there you go. Austin asked, "Do I predict Canada?" Absolutely, yeah. So my prediction, Austin, is pretty simple. I think what's going to happen in the United States is the federal government. So I continue to use the 80-year change of language. So it went from the United States are before the Civil War, then it became the United States is after the Civil War. And then after World War II, it became the federal government is, right? The Fed is. And I think we're going to go back to the United States are. I think we're going to everything that we built to win World War II, the entire bureaucratic system, the aircraft carriers, everything, the war machine, we just never shut it off. We just kept it all running. The whole thing was running. All of Washington, D.C. is a fake construct. It is not real. And it's USA Inc., right? It's USA Incorporated. It has nothing to do with the original deal that the equal states who are equal to the federal government, we've turned into people who believe there's a major league and a minor league. It's not that. It's a shared division of competencies in the Republic. And so the individual states with Bitcoin, we're going to see it, right? It's happening every single day, where the states are able to exercise their sovereignty more, and they will be forced to exercise their sovereignty more. And I think it's going to create a counterbalance where we are going to actually shrink the size of the footprint of Washington, D.C. We're going to shrink the powers. We're going to shrink the overall role of DC and the federal government in the affairs of the country. Individual states are going to take up much more of their responsibilities that have become dormant, and they don't really exercise them. So here's what's going to happen. They're going to create basically a new deal between DC and the actual states. That new deal will permit other people to join. So I believe that several Canadian provinces will join the United States. Will join the United States because Canada it's a stupid country and it doesn't work. Each individual state, province of Canada will be better off as a result. I'm just going to pass the keys on here. Will be better off as a result. And I think what you're going to get, the 17th Amendment makes a deal much more difficult. Yeah, I'll check into the 17th Amendment, Austin. My prediction is you're going to get Alberta. If Alberta already had a port, if it wasn't landlocked, it would be gone already. It wouldn't. Quebec just uses it for negotiation, and so they have everything they need. Quebec doesn't really need much else. They have energy right, and they'll always have it right. As long as gravity works, Quebec is fine. So my prediction is you're going to get a land bridge between Alaska and the United States with some form of renegotiation, some way for them to join. British Columbia, Ontario, Quebec on their own. Atlantic provinces join because they're absolutely useless and would not even come close to making it on their own. So they'll have to join the United States. And I can even see it going south. I can see certain Central American states joining the United States of America. Mexico might even join, right? I can see expansion. I see expansion of the United States within a few years. Direct election of senators versus of course. That might even get renegotiated. So in the old, people that don't know this, it's still the way in Canada. It's one of the differences we have. In the old system in the United States, you did not directly elect your senators. What happened was your state legislature had a vote internally. So whatever party was in charge of the state legislature would choose the senator. So it was a way to keep them out of popular politics, which I actually still agree with. I wish we would go back to that system because now if you have the senators just like barking dogs like any other politician trying to get money and attention in the news, it's a problem. In Canada, we have kind of a hybrid. There's some senators who are voted, some are appointed by the federal government. Our problem in Canada is they're appointed by the federal government. If they were appointed by the states, which is something that I tried to change during my time working in the Canadian Senate, because we were open to change while I was there, and that was one of the ideas that had some traction, which was just let the state legislatures vote on who they want to fill the Senate seats. But there was no direct representation to vote for senators before. What is this voting you speak of? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, right? So the direct election, I mean, I wish it would change back to the old ways. I thought it was a better system in the United States, because there's still, like, you vote for the legislature and the state chooses. So there's still some kind of a proxy of voting in there, but it's not perfect. We don't need so much voting, I don't think, right? It's kind of a myth that all this stuff gets done with democracy. So Canada can't make it. They simply can't survive. So if they don't join the United States, I don't know what they're going to do, but it doesn't work. It's a dumb country, right? It's just not going to make it. So, and I think every individual province in Canada is better off not together. It's like one of these things where Quebec will be fine, Ontario will be fine. They're not joining the United States. British Columbia will be fine. None of us really work well together as it is in Canada anyway, right? So who cares? I just don't think it's going to happen. So, but we'll see. We'll see. Glad you made it, Austin. Glad you're coming, man. I love it. Austin is one of the people that opened the Bitcoin Embassy, if people don't know, January 1st, 2014 in Wall Street in New York City, and is one of the coolest Bitcoiners I know. I hung out with Austin in Texas last week, so that was a lot of fun. All right, team. That's all I got for today. I got kids who need some attention. I got a Saturday worth of stuff to do here and a bit of a slow news day. So that's what we got. All right, team. Peace. Have a great day, everyone.